Hi, I'm Jonathan Farrow. I currently work at PlayStation, and just to give a bit of an intro about me, I started life as a electronics engineer. It's a very technical past, and then moved into sort of product at my time at Rolls-Royce. It's sort of like a dual role, and I've worked on some sort of interesting products from my point of view as my time as a product manager. So from designing parts for submarines, APIs to help communications, and most recently the PlayStation 5. So what I'm going to sort of talk to you guys about today is really some really sort of interesting points that I've used in my career, and I see a lot of other people now beginning to use as well. It's really about outcomes. So what I really want to first get across is outcomes versus output, what the difference is, and sort of how the approaches differ. And then I want to really go into sort of a top-down approach of how to implement outcomes. And then really, once all that's done, a key part for product managers is what the roadmap process looks like, and then how to begin implementing that process inside an organization. So to begin with, so feature factories. It is a very common thing for product managers to fall into, and it's really where you have a roadmap that is very much feature A, feature B, feature C, feature D, very linear process. Sort of let's plan this out at the start of the quarter or start of the year, all the features we're going to deliver, and it's usually very stakeholder driven. And so some stakeholder will come along and say, "Hey, I've got this great idea for a feature. You don't need to talk to the customer because I've already done that. So yeah, can you build this feature?" And many product managers listening to this now go, "Yes, I've had that happen to me." It's a very common thing, and it's a very normal human behavior from a stakeholders' point of view because they already have some knowledge, and it's a very normal way of businesses operating. Now, what I want you to do is hold on to that sentence I just said, normal behavior, because that will come up later on when we talk about implementing this process internally. So I've kind of selected this image because it's kind of relevant. So a feature factory sort of has really derived its process from manufacturing. So sort of back in the day when physical products were being made, and they were the sort of main output really at the time. So a lot of the business processes were designed around manufacturing. And they've now sort of become the most dominant processes today. But one of them is sort of output being the key driver. So obviously for a factory where you have a sort of non-differentiating, or I say differentiating, divergent product. So you have a very uniform product across your line. You just want to output as much as you can because that increases revenue, that increases profit. So what is the lever you've got to pull there is increase output. So that was the way things operated back then, but that doesn't truly work in sort of software product development because no real features are the same. So, and they tend to have different sort of outcomes attached to them. So it doesn't really work. So what you tend to find is people's backlogs grow and grow and grow and grow because you can't just keep outputting all these same features, because what tends to happen is they fail, they don't meet what said stakeholder expected to happen. And this happens a lot. It's a very common cycle, and it causes a number of issues to happen. But one of the big things of a feature factory is they tend to optimize for output. So efficiency is what tends to happen. Is right. Okay, let's try and get as much output as possible. Now, this leads to these huge cycles of waste, right? So I've built feature A. It took me a long time because, as I said, stakeholders said it. We've designed it. Maybe we spoke to the customer. We said, "Oh, this feature, how can we make this work for you?" And then when we go to launch it, some things can happen. It may not meet the business goal. The feature may work for the customer, but it doesn't actually achieve what the business needs. And that's wasted value, or it doesn't meet the sort of predicted linear timescales, because this product's more of a journey in a sense when building a feature, a lot of truly discovery. So if you eliminate that and you sort of pre-plan it, let's build this feature, there can be a lot of effort put in, it didn't meet the value, so now that's wasted effort and therefore wasted time. So, and this can happen as a cyclic thing, and therefore what happens is backlogs tend to grow, and then when they grow, what happens is people then try to start padding out features so they get more in a time. So it becomes almost imbalanced in generating value. Features grow here, but the true value does not happen. And so I almost call this sort of like fortune cookie product planning in a sense. And I really like this quote. I say a quote: "A plan I've been working on for a long time is beginning to take shape." Right. So I've been working on it for a long time. It's only now beginning to take shape, and that's very sort of symptomatic of these very like linear processes. So you're sort of 10 months in and you're only now finally, we've finally delivered feature A or B, or started to get some value. And that's kind of an issue. So what we really start to see more and more in the industry is people move towards outcomes. So how do we define an outcome? Because we could define it in many different ways, but the definition I like to use and other people like to use is outcomes are about changing customer behavior to meet a business need. And the key thing there is customer behavior. And that's really core to everything I'm about to talk about. So what do we need to do then to define an outcome? Well, we need to make it specific. And the reason for that is this is where a lot of people fail when they take this approach, because a lot of people go with the following. This quarter we should aim to increase revenue. This is not specific. It's very sort of high level. It's more of a impact, right? This is something we want to, an impact on the business. This needs to happen. So it's more of a end value, right, or an end state, because it's a factor of many variables and many outcomes that drive this impact. But it's not really. There's no customer behavior in there. So where's the customer behavior we're changing to get that? There is none. So it's not specific enough. It's still partly valuable because this is what we can, like the high level thing we can be working towards. And I'll get to how we derive from that. So what would a specific outcome look like? Well, the outcome that I'm going to use as an example is quite a common one in e-commerce. The outcome we are after is getting the customer to put one extra item in the shopping cart. And the big thing about this is, number one, it's attempting to change customer behavior. I'm trying to get the customer to put an extra item in the shopping cart. That's a behavior. And there's many behaviors that lead up to that, but that's the behavior I'm trying to change. So that's an outcome. But what else is in there is that it's measurable, right? So I've now got something I can measure. We want to get them to put one extra item in the cart. Okay, so if they do that, we've never succeeded. Now, some of you are probably thinking, how many customers? And that's a good question to ask, and that's where we can get more specific. We could say, I want 40% or 40% of new customers to put an extra item in the shopping cart, or 40% of our current customers put an extra item in the shopping cart. Now we have two values really to be working towards. It's even more specific. And how you get there is really we must start at this level, and then you make the goal more specific later on in the process, and we'll get to that. Now, a common thing as well is, okay, but where do I start? I've got loads of outcomes, loads of behaviors, I guess, that I could be changing. What do I do with this? And this is where, tying back to earlier, the high level impact comes in. So typically what will happen sort of in a company, right, is the very sort of leadership level will come up with very high level impacts, right? They're not so bothered about the minutiae of things, the small detail. It's the high level thing. We need to increase customer spend when people visit our site, right? Or we need to expand into this market, or we need to increase customer loyalty. These high level, these concepts that have potentially some measurable component to them, but they don't usually have a customer behavior or like that they can change. So there's a top level impact that we're gonna go with. Now from that, we're gonna have our outcome that we spoke about earlier, but now I'm going to call it a challenge. So this is the challenge level. So here's the impact that we're trying to change. Now, what's some sort of logical statement that we think we're going to work towards that will have an impact on that. So what we're going to go with is we need to get a customer to put an extra item in the cart. So going with the example I went with earlier. So this is the reason I'm saying this is because there's logic we can apply to this. If a customer puts an extra item in the cart, they're increasing spending when they visit the site. Okay, so there's some logic there that goes, okay, well, this is now a logical goal to work towards. Okay. So once you have that, this is where the real sort of interesting part really happens, especially for product managers and the team, is what behaviors drive this. And this is really when you can start to come up with hypotheses around this and say, well, I think X will achieve this or Y will achieve this. And just for an example, when our hypothesis you could come up with is if customers are recommended items, they will add them to the cart. So that's just I'm going on a hunch right now. I think that could be a case. It's a fairly, I guess, a logic behind it. So this hunch. And that's one approach to doing this is brainstorming with your team ideas such as this. And that's it's almost like a hypothesis there that here's a behavior that we can change. When the recommended item, they will add to the cart. We're trying to influence something there. And it can also be there's other styles of problems as well, and we'll touch on that, such as negative problems. So we come up with a hypothesis, but there's other ways of doing that, and the key one is finding sort of a leading indicator. And what I mean by this is something that you notice that when they do this, when this increases, the goal you're after also increases. So you can say, all right, well, going back to earlier, we notice that when the recommendation engine or customers recommended an item, the similar to item they're shopping for, that they then add that to their cart. And we've got data that shows that 20% of customers are doing this. We've now got a leading indicator. We can say, look, we've got data behind this, so we know if this goes up, then the outcome is also going to go up. The cart value is going to go up. So this is something this is very key to driving an outcome-driven product process. So next is truly understanding your customers. So you need to sort of map user journeys. And the reason I say this is, so we've got our hunches, we've got leading indicators. But what we really want to know is what are all the user journeys through our product? Because what we're doing there is we're mapping customer behaviors. And as I said earlier, what are customer behaviors? They're outcomes that we're trying to change. So we'll go through the step one, all the way down to, the most successful customers, the ones that are putting the most in the cart. Cool. What are all their behaviors? What are all their positive behaviors that are leading there? We go down a level and say, right, what are successful customers, but they're not as successful as the top level? What are their behaviors? What are they missing? What negative behaviors are in there that are causing them not to jump up into that positive top level one? And identifying those positive and negative is key, because you can also then decide, right, let's try and eliminate those from the process. And then the final, obviously, the very final tier, you could say, is almost, well, what is the very negative approach where people are abandoning or not putting items in the cart? What are the steps and behaviors there, and what can we identify as potential items to change? And it's through doing this that you really start to identify all the sort of initial options and outcomes you can go for. So Now I've said all this, probably some of you now thinking, this is all well and good, but how do I put this into a roadmap? How do I say this is what we're going to do? These are the features we're going to deliver. Well, the first thing I want to sort of get across before I explain that is sort of this concept. So where the black line is, the black circle, that's sort of like your knowledge field. That's what you know today. So you've got your goal that you're working towards, and you're there with your knowledge field, and you go, right, well, we've got my hunches, and we've got our leading indicators, and maybe we've got some other research from when we built other features in the past. So these are our initial states that we're going to work on, our initial outcomes or behaviors that we're going to try and change and take on, and that will lead us to that high level outcome, a high level goal, the challenge. And as you sort of, and the key thing here is you're then sort of going on this journey towards that goal. It's no longer a linear path. So you'll take one outcome and you'll tackle it. You'll then obviously you then got to measure, was that a success, and what did we learn from changing that behavior? Did it have a positive impact? Did it have a negative, or did it just have a neutral that it's not really changed anything? And from that, you'll learn, and your knowledge field will then expand. And when it expands, you then see additional potential behaviors, or you know more about behaviors that you can now go, okay, we've got more hypothesis, we can now try these, and we can now try and move along. And slowly, well, it may not be slowly, you'll move along the behaviors or the outcomes towards your goal as your knowledge expands. So thinking about that, how would you build a roadmap around that? Well, what you're not going to do is say, this is feature A or B, C, D. What you're going to say is, and what we'll first address as a single team. We can talk about how to tackle this as a multiple team, but first of all, as a single team, how would you tackle this? Well, what you do is you say, this is the hypothesis. This is the first outcome we're going to tackle, and that's all you say. That you say at the end of this, say we're on a quarter. At the end of this quarter, this is the desired is the impact and the desired challenge that we'll have. This is the outcome that we're going to have at the end. More people are going to put shopping in their cart, and these are the behaviors and small outcomes we're going to change towards that. So you just state the very first one, that is it, and you've got your end state. And then it's very much experimenting and bringing things in along that journey, because it's no longer feature-led, it's now outcome-led. So it kind of changes the dynamic here a little bit. It's very much a journey, and probably some of you are thinking, that's all well, and I can see the benefit of this, and it's probably how some of you are trying to work right now. But there's always a problem that comes up with this. There's always a problem. Is the hardest part is getting everybody on board with this approach. Okay, this is by far the hardest thing. And why is that? That's because we'll go back all the way to manufacturing. A lot of business processes have been built around what was perceived predictability. So back in the day, right, well, if we turn on manufacturing this much, cool, well, I've got this much output by this date, because you had so much unit output per day, potentially. So that's how projects were planned, that's how organizations were sort of built around these sort of processes. Sales team could go out and say, yes, I can sell you this many units, by this day we'll have them available. And then when we move to software, we no longer really have that predictability, right? We've got to experiment, we've got to, as we said, pick the outcomes, try and change the behavior and work towards that. But what that doesn't give us is the predictability that stakeholders and people want, because really what we're saying is this is the goal that we're going to work towards. This is the thing that we are trying to change. And what you're not saying is these are the features we're going to build. So by this date, you'll have this date, you'll have this feature to sell. By this date, you'll have this feature to sell. What you'll have is you'll have these outcomes. Now, it's the best ways that I've found personally, and talking to people who have taken this approach within the industry, is it's all about winning trust. Trust is sort of the key thing here for getting this approach. So what typically happens is a single team will take this on initially. and they've got to buy the stakeholders in, and they've got to change the conversation. You're having a conversation with your stakeholders. It's no longer, right, what features should we plan? What features do you guys want? Do you have a list, or this is what I'm thinking? Here's my roadmap. Those conversations need to change to really asking the stakeholders, what are the outcomes that they want for the business? What are they trying to achieve? And then you bring the stakeholders into those conversations and this approach with a team. What tends to then happen is, well, at the end of the quarter, you've had very much work towards the goal, because as you've been going along, you've been measuring, and you can actively show throughout. So look, well, this leading indicator is increasing, or look, we're actually getting more in the cart now because we're just taking these either short iteration cycles or just delivering along this way that's always towards this goal. So you can actually show change as you go along, and that really builds trust. Or at the end, you can say, look, we increased it by this much, but we didn't quite make that goal. We didn't get 40% of customers to increase the cart. Maybe we got 30, but we learn all of this information and we know why this is not going to happen. So when we make new business goals, we've got more information now to influence the kind of goals that we're now producing. So it creates a very positive feedback loop to stakeholders. And then what tends to happen is you get additional teams coming on board for this. Now, the way to take this approach with additional teams is typically everyone has to work on that same goal, right? Or you can have a collection of teams. This is the goal they're trying to work towards, and to achieve that, teams will pick behaviours they're going to try and change that will go towards that top level, that challenge. So this team A will say that this is the first outcome we're going to have. Team B, this is the outcome, and then they go along and share information that way. In this way, it sort of stops the kind of clashing, or this feature is dependent on this feature here, because really now you're all working towards a similar goal. So you can sort of discuss between you and say, well, look, this is the outcome we think we're going to have. This is the behavior we're going to try to change. Whether we need to work together to build this feature or not. So it just becomes more fluid as well in this kind of approach. So I really do advocate for this approach, and I know a lot of the industry is kind of going this way. So if you're really thinking about it, try and take a team that is that will buy into this process, and some stakeholders that will sort of also buy into this process, and then prove it that way, and then bring it out within the organization. And it's sort of a modern approach to software development. So I just really want to now summarize everything I've talked about here. So just some key points. So one of the big things I really do think you should do when you do this process is map out user journeys. So go along, find out all the customer journeys that are happening, and the behaviors that customers are doing, and what that's driving. Because once you know that, you really can then start having an effect on the business. Follow the impact, challenge, outcome, output chain. So start from what's the very high level impact that the leadership team want to do. What's the challenge that we think will work towards that? What are the behaviors and outcomes, even going smaller and smaller down, that we will try and change and we'll learn about and experiment about. And then from that, what are the outputs that these outcomes are driving? And that's how then you build that, drive it down. So the next thing is to think about positive and negative behaviors, right? What are the positive behaviors we can change, and don't ignore the negative ones as well. Are there things that are blocking? And there may be very small things on there, such as the recommendation potentially not showing different items and it's distracting people. Just thinking out loud there, like that could be a negative sort of behavior, that people are getting distracted because of a different item being shown potentially. And then the other thing is, implementing a process can take a while. It can take time. So where I've tried to implement this in the past, you go and you think, okay, we'll have this all in place in a few months. No, it tends to take longer. As I said, you need to start with the team and really, really grow it out. And it's all about gaining trust within the organization. And beware of the classic J curve with this. So you're implementing a new process here where you're thinking about behavioral change now and outcomes. And this is a shift potentially for the team and stakeholders. So people may fall back on old ways, or people may not be quite used to yet mapping out journeys, or experimenting around changing customer behaviors, or designing around this style of approach. Then things can take longer, and then it could be perceived as not working. But over time, as you show feedback coming in, and then sort of just more information or a positive outcome, you really begin to trust, build trust, because usually the alternative is where features, and you've got a growing backlog, multiple stakeholders trying to input, and it's just too many feature branches opening up. So usually this is going to have a positive impact. So it usually will persuade the stakeholders, but it can take time. That's really it for me. So this is something I would love to have any questions on or anything like that. Then definitely reach out to me as well. You can find me at Twitter at JonathanFarrow4. You can just reach me out there, and I can talk to you more if you like. Thank you, everyone.